We're in the State Archives in the Nevada State Library and Archives building in Carson City. The State Archives keeps the historical records of state government and documents the official decisions, the policies, the laws, the opinions of the Supreme Court, and all the official actions that state government bodies make. One of the records groups we have are the records of the Surveyor General of the state of Nevada. And that records the transfer of title from the federal government to the state, and also helps document why the federal government owns so much land in the state of Nevada. The federal government owns approximately 87% of the land in the state of Nevada. It was part of the Enabling Act that allowed Nevada to become a state. And so it appears in the first paragraph of the Constitution of the state, and we can go and take a look at it right now. This is the first page, which has the ordinance that describes the conditions in which Nevada was going to become a state. There were three conditions. The first is that there would not allow slavery to be in the state. The second was that there would be toleration of all religious sentiment. And the third is that the people inhabiting said territory do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within the territory, and that the same shall remain at the sole and entire disposition of the United States. Nevada was the first state in the West to become a state, and it was going to set a new precedent for states coming into the Union. Congress wanted three states originally, Colorado, Nebraska, and Nevada, and basically required the same things of all those states. And it was to emphasize that all of the states basically have given up their sovereignty to the United States government. And so every state that entered the Union after Nevada had that ordinance in there where they gave up all of their public lands. These are the first records of Carson Valley, Utah Territory. Nevada was part of Carson County beginning in 1851. It wasn't organized into counties yet, and they needed some kind of recognition for their land claims because they all had ranches set up and they had trading posts. So they came together and they formed their own government. This is the public record that says, pursuant to the notice of this meeting, we've all come together and we agree to form our own government. And these are the proceedings dated November 12th, 1851. They actually set, and they sent a resolution off to Congress to try and create their own territory, all maybe 80 people that were settling in this area here. They never really owned the land, but they had what's called a possessory claim. And the possessory claim meant that they had the government had a right to recognize their claim on the land, but they did not legally own it because all land ownership comes from the federal government. And it comes from the federal government because this part of the United States was acquired from Mexico in a treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And so the federal government had the right and title to all the land that was in the state and prepared to grant it out in portions. They would sell it to individuals, or they would grant states a certain amount of property so that they could sell it off to support their local government or their state government. And so the state, we would create a list, which was called a clear list, which we would send back to Washington, D.C., to the Department of Interior, and they would review it, and then they would grant that property to the state of Nevada for Nevada to sell. This is Carson City Land District for public buildings containing an aggregate of 6,650 acres. So the State Land Office petitioned the General Land Office of the Department of the Interior for this particular aggregate of land. And this is the descriptions of the lands, the date of the selection, the description which is done in sections and townships and ranges, and the amount of land in each tract. It looks like they were estimating the amount of money that the federal government would have made if they sold the land, and they transferred it to the state because the prices were comparable. The state sold its property that it received for the same amount that the General Land Office of the U.S. government did. And so it was approved by the State Land Commissioner and Surveyor General of the United States and sent to Nevada. So this becomes a legal document. Becomes the document by which Nevada keeps track of its own public land that it received from the federal government. This is a map that shows public and private land ownership in the state of Nevada. This gives you an idea of what 87% of the land in Nevada looks like. 87% is owned by the federal government. All of the white portions in the map show private ownership, and they're very sparse. The majority of the people live down in the Las Vegas, Clark County area down here, which is all privately owned now. We're talking about 2/3 to 3/4 of the population of the state. And another quarter live up in this area here, and then the remainders are spread throughout the entire state of Nevada. So it's a very sparsely populated area out there. This is the amount of space that people weren't interested in buying. And in fact, in 1929, President Herbert Hoover had an idea to give all the public land back to the states. They figured that the federal government had made all the money it could off of it, and they were just going to give it to the states. And I know I couldn't find a reaction from Nevada, but I do know that the Utah governor wrote back and said, we're not able to sell the land that you gave us right now, and so you're going to give us more of the land that we can't sell. And so that pretty much died. That idea died. So they had a series of meetings with the Western governors, and they said, what do you really need? And this is primarily out in the rural areas. It's primarily ranching and mining. What you see in the green here, these are the national forest areas. And so the U.S. Forest Service and the Department of Agriculture manages those parcels of land. The Department of Interior, National Parks, manages Great Basin National Park. The military has all of the pink. This is the Nellis Air Force Base range here. And there are various gunnery ranges that are set up around the state. The federal government started to give money to local counties beginning in the 1970s with the payment in lieu of taxes. It started in 1976. In 1979, Jimmy Carter had this plan that they were going to put 4,600 missile bunkers and kind of hide them throughout Nevada. And the missiles would rotate between the bunkers. So you basically have lots of little military bases spread throughout Nevada and eastern Utah. And it was called the MX missile. And they had it all designed out, and they did a huge amount of environmental impact statements and studies for all the counties. As it turned out, it would have severely impacted the rural communities. It would have increased some of the jobs in that, but the feeling was in the rural areas that it would have made Nevada a target for Soviet missiles. So for about 3 years, there was a lot of federal money that was put in here and then in 1981, under President Reagan, they scrapped the whole idea. But the money, there was a sizable amount of money. Then they started to plan for Yucca Mountain, which is a nuclear waste depository, which would be located in Nye County. It would have been located on the Nellis Air Force Base range, and so it was already on federally managed and local property within Nye County. There was supposedly a national study done, and they determined that Nevada would be the best site for it because of its proximity to the Nevada test site, which is where they tested the nuclear missiles. So it would be a relatively safe place to store nuclear waste from all around the country. No one really likes the fact that Yucca Mountain is going to be there. And one of the main reasons is that the radioactive material would have to be transferred from all across the country. It was going to be transferred by truck or rail, and it was going to follow the major highways or the major train things, and it was going to come into contact with major cities. So right now, there's still some kind of activity there where they maintain the property, but they weren't going to go forward with it anymore. Whereas, Nevadans don't want to own the land necessarily. They want to have a stronger say in how and what the federal regulations are. There was a feeling that the federal policy was made back east without any knowledge of what our local conditions are. And that's where we usually run into any kind of tension between the two. Unless they find a new use for the land, I think this is the way it's going to be from now on. I don't think it's going to change.